I'm Brittany, this is Shen Wei, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we are finishing Guardian, Volume 3, but the trilogy as a whole. We are completing Guardian today. We finished the main story last time, which would be yesterday, and now we are into the extra side stories, bonus stories, tidbits. And I believe we are on page 369 for part 4 of the bonus story that's called The Mountain Spirit. We usually read for a couple of hours. We'll probably go a little bit longer so that we have plenty of time. We're looking good in terms of page count. We usually read about 40 to 50. I have enough time allotted today to read up to 60, so we are good on time. And any time that we have left over, we're going to spend to chat about it. Chat about Guardian, about the book, and then eventually, when we start discussing like both the book and the show and like comparing and contrasting and stuff, I will give you guys a spoiler warning in case you have not seen the series, you don't want to be spoiled, and you want to duck out before you hear anything. So don't worry about show spoilers when we start talking about stuff. I am going to separate that into basically the end of the stream, and you will get a heads up, so you can avoid that if you want to. Is that it? I believe so. I believe we just get to dive in. Why are the curtains not entirely open? There we go. Alrighty. We may not have 2 breaks today. We may just have 1. We're kind of playing it by ear. That's how the end of series usually goes. We kind of have to get a little loose with the rules. So there will definitely be 1 break in about 45 minutes. There may or may not be a second one. We may just go straight from finishing the book into a discussion about it. It depends on how I feel. It depends on how my throat feels since I'm getting over a cold. So we're vibing. We are vibing today. Thank you. When it's the end of a series, who the hell cares about structure or what the heck we typically do? We do whatever we need to. So, page 369 for part 4. Ever since Shen-san's nonsense had complicated everything with the specter of romance, the easy comfort they'd shared had faded. While playing Go, they tried to avoid looking at each other and just focus on the match instead. When they chatted, it felt, at least to Shen-san, as if they had to search for things to talk about. It was all very awkward. But at the same time, his leg healed quickly. Shen-san was a rough man, accustomed to cuts and stab wounds. The broken bone healed in well under the time it would take for ordinary folk, and then there were a few days of hobbling around after the splint came off. In no time, he was back to running and jumping easily. With his limbs all back in working order, there was no more reason for him to spend his days under someone else's roof. Besides, he still had things that had to be taken care of. A day came when, as Yao Xiang watered the medicinal herbs in the garden behind the hut, Shen-san packed up his things. He stood beneath the eaves, zoning out as he watched Yao Xiang busying himself among the plants. When Yao Xiang turned, their eyes happened to meet, and they both froze. Yao Xiang stood up. Surrounded by the herbs, he was first to speak. "Are you leaving?" Shen-san answered, and then found himself wanting to explain further, even if it was unnecessary. "I was tasked with sending Lord Wong's widow and son across the river. I don't know how they're doing, so I need to check on them. And after the Mid-Autumn Festival, Assistant Manager Zhang will be leaving for the northern border. We shared drinks once, so I must ensure he arrives safely." Yao Xiang stood stone still before finally opening his mouth. And in italics, as in, it says, "You and I shared drinks once too." Nothing. Yao Xiang lowered his head. "Then we'll meet again." The lives of the people of the Jianghu were like grass. They never spoke of parting or leaving. Shen-san looked down, adjusted the sword on his back, and walked across the courtyard. When he reached the gate, he suddenly stopped. He turned back to look at Yao Sheng, who was watching him go. A great kindness should be repaid with action, not words. I'll remember everything you've done for me. Once I've dealt with those things, I'll come back and bring a couple jars of good wine with me, and then... His tongue, usually so nimble, failed him. Cold sweat broke out all over his back. As it evaporated, heat suffused his neck and then his ears, steaming him until he stammered, Then... Oh. Do not perceive for a second. I'm going to get a running start into this. Okay. As it evaporated, heat suffused his neck and then his ears, steaming him until he stammered, Then I'll be yours to command. Cool. Tight. Whew. I feel like I'm telling on myself. Ya Sheng seemed to laugh, but the sound was tinged with melancholy. That about sums them up, doesn't it? I'm all right. Shen-san gave him a searching glance, then took his leave. He walked along the river for hundreds of meters before turning back to give the little thatched hut in its garden one last look from afar. As he walked, his legs felt heavy and there was an emptiness in his heart. He couldn't summon any real energy. Even his heartbeat felt like it was just going through the motions. It was as if a rope lay around his neck, trying to drag him back to the place he was leaving behind. Master Shen-san, who could come and go without leaving any trace, was no longer decisive, unrestrained, and free. He now knew he had well and truly fallen for the Yao's tricks. His very soul was held hostage. He had to return. These pining gays are going to, there's a scene break, by the way, they are just maddening sometimes, oftentimes, a lot. I have to leave this domestic gay bliss with the guy that I clearly must be life partners with. Like, there's no option. Obviously, I'm coming back. I have to come back to the hut with some wine so we can live in simple domestic bliss. That's obviously. I mean, relatable. I have felt exactly the same. Me, who could not scrape together just two flimsy pieces of executive function back in the day, somehow managed to move her ass across the country to be with the woman who would become my wife. I couldn't tell you how I did it. I wasn't capable of doing much of anything back then. But it was like, no, of course I have to. What do you mean? I have to go live in a small house and just be in queer domestic bliss for the rest of my days. This is just, there's no option here. So, relatable king. We're on page 371 for part 5. At the end of the 9th lunar month, as autumn settled deep into the earth, the grass and trees withered. Shen-san's sword broke. We're just gonna skate right past that metaphor. He'd had the blade forged by a random roadside blacksmith, and it wasn't worth much, so he wasn't especially upset to lose it. He leaves, and his flimsy excuse for heterosexuality just breaks, and he doesn't really care all that much. He just dug a hole and filled it with the corpses of the people who'd been hired to assassinate Assistant Minister Zhang. Then he stuck a wooden plank in the ground and wrote, "A hole full of shitty dogs. Signed, your Grandpa Shen." Finally, he stuck his broken sword in the ground by the plank, burying it right to the hilt. I've read too much fan fiction. I'm sorry. He couldn't have possibly shown more arrogance. A few of his friends guided the terrified Assistant Minister Zhang away. When they saw Shen San's masterpiece, they tried to talk him out of it. Killing them is one thing, but why this? Are you trying to make trouble for yourself? How can you continue in the Jianghe after this? I'm not continuing. Shen San leisurely wrapped his hand, which he'd injured on the broken sword. He glanced southward, facing the fierce wind head on. I'm washing my hands of all this and retiring. Retiring? Retiring to where? A paradise of peach blossoms, he said. A cave filled with webs of desires. What do you want from me? All right? What actually? That didn't sound anything like a proper retirement spot. Okay. What kind of retirement are you? This sounds like the perfect retirement spot to me. But when his friends tried to ask what had gotten into him, Shen San had already demonstrated his ability to walk without leaving footprints. With a few leaps, he was gone. He started his journey south in late autumn. By the time he reached his destination, the mortal realm was buried in snow. Winter had arrived particularly early this year, and it was particularly cold as well. Frost crested both banks of the Yangtze River. He was wanted by the palace and buffeted by the snow. He couldn't have been any more haggard. But despite all that, a warmth was nestled right by his heart, urging him to ride back with the speed of an arrow in flight. In the depths of winter, coated in a layer of snow so fine it looked like salt, and bearing the fine wine he had so carefully chosen, Shen San finally found the little valley where he'd convalesced. That's a word for it. When his eyes fell on that little thatched hut, waves of flowers bloomed in his heart. He strode forward at once, but then remembered something. Retreating a bit, he faced the bitingly cold wind and dusted himself off, then scrubbed the mud from his pants with frigid water from the pond. The chill turned his fingers the red of cooked shrimp, but he still made sure to wash his face. Unfortunately, with his hands so cold, he had little fine control over them. When he tried to shave with his small dagger, he accidentally cut his chin. He hid this tiny blemish under his shirt collar and then made a show of strolling leisurely over to the hut. You have to look good for the husband. He had it all planned out. He would open the door, and when his eyes finally fell on the person within, he would smile and say, getting a running start again. He had it all planned out. He would open the door, and when his eyes finally fell on the person within, he would smile and say, I'm back. You can order me around as you please. I hate that they illustrated this because that means that this is definitely not going to happen. Just a short few 100 meters more. His heart was as soft as cooked tofu. Those words rolled around on his tongue at least 1,000 times. How he would stand, what tone he would use, how he would smile. He had mentally rehearsed it all, until he could have done it in his sleep. He reached to the gate, but just as the words were about to leave his lips, Shen-san suddenly saw that the garden was covered in ice, and that snow had drifted over the frozen ground. The medicinal garden was strewn with sickly branches and leaves, all clumped in the mud. His heart sank. All the warmth evaporated. Yaoxiong was deeply fastidious. Had he been there, not a single fallen leaf would be lying in the garden. It was clear he'd been gone for a long time. The little garden was abandoned. Dazed, Shen-san stood at the entrance for a while before finally going in with his wine. He searched both inside and out. Everything, even the stone go set, was covered in a layer of dust. Everything but the wind chime, which still rang. All that had happened there might as well have been just a fragment of his post-injury imagination. With a puff of the icy wind, it all scattered like dust. She was really like, no. You all know that they're headed toward a happy ending, but that doesn't mean I can't make you sad. Still. That was a scene break, by the way. Or a part break, really. Part 6. Shen-san settled down in the thatched hut. Clumsily, he cleared out the mud and snow in the yard and dusted everything inside the hut clean, then buried his wine jars beneath the plum blossom tree. After the bitter winter, the plum blossoms would bloom. They would carry moonlight within their petals, dusted delicately with frost. He reinforced the hut with wood and stone, showing every sign that he intended to stay for a long time. Next, he carved a sword out of wood, and every morning when the birds started chirping, he practiced with it. He spent his daylight hours hunting and fixing up the garden. I should have taken the cue from my throat. He spent his daylight hours hunting and fixing up the garden, and when the sun set, he slept. Slowly, the ethereal little garden and hut that had seemed fit for an immortal came to seem more and more homely. The once elegant garden of medicinal herbs was reborn as a vegetable garden. We're both thinking it, right? Zhao wanted to plant a fucking fuck-ass vegetable garden. At the end of the main story, that was rude of her. Shen-san hung a row of cured meat and dried fruit beneath the wind chime. He brought so much life to the place that even when the chime sounded, it seemed to ring with the fragrance of living. The only thing he couldn't bear to touch was the plum blossom tree by the entrance. That he left to grow as it pleased. In the blink of an eye, the plum blossoms had bloomed thrice and withered thrice. In the thatched hut, Shen-san had played Go against himself for 3 years. Shen-san had fulfilled his promise. But the one he'd returned for never came back. Finally, it seemed he couldn't wait any longer. One evening, he washed the stone go set and hung up the board. He put away the cured meat and dried fruit hanging in the window and packed up all the rest of his things before the sky turned dark. It added up to only enough for a small bundle, which he hung from his wooden sword. After hanging that on the door, he blew the lights out early and went to bed. It seemed he was about to go on a long journey. Just after midnight, when the moon was barely hugging the plum blossom tree's branches, a black-robed man stepped out from the tree's shadows. He laid one ice-cold hand against the bundle, then passed through the door as silently as if he were a shadow himself. It was the hut's owner, Shen Wei. 3 years earlier, when Shen San had left the mountain, Wei had followed him the whole time. I'm sorry, I need to repeat that? Because that took a second. 3 years earlier, I don't know why I'm surprised. 3 years earlier, when Shen San had left the mountain, Wei had followed him the whole time. Why are we surprised? Why are we shocked in the slightest? Why did we not see this coming? And by we, I mean me, sure. Wei watched as he traveled great distances and faced constant danger, but also saw him at the height of his glory, his call never going unanswered. Wei had thought he would never come back, but somehow the man really did walk away from all that hustle and bustle and return. As a result, this mountain spirit, who was never meant to see the light of day, had been left with no choice but to hide himself, hoping Shen San would leave again in disappointment. He never imagined he'd be in hiding for over 1,000 days and nights. But Wei's long sleeve stirred up a light breeze. The highly skilled man who would startle awake at the drop of a leaf somehow fell into an even deeper sleep, as though his soul had left his body. Wei gently sat down next to him, the tip of a finger carefully tracing each of his features. Stroking further downward, Wei's finger came to rest on the back of Shen San's hand, which he then cradled in his own. Barely audible, he called out, "Kunlun." He had sworn never to meet Kunlun's reincarnations. He had already trespassed in caring for Shen San for over a month. Those dozens of days spent with him should have never happened. He shouldn't still be greedy for more. It was just as well that the man had reached the end of his patience. He was finally going to leave. The next day, as usual, Wei hid in the shadow of the plum blossom tree. Of course he did. He left that tree alone. And so, of course, Shen Wei would just be the whole... He didn't emerge from his hiding spot until he had seen Shen San leave with his bundle and horse. After leaning against the gate in a daze for some time, feeling a void in his chest as if his heart had been cut out, he unearthed the wine Shen San had buried under the tree. Perhaps Shen San had thought the wine Wei made wasn't strong enough. The wine he brought back was powerful liquor from the north. When Wei swallowed it, it felt like a fierce blaze had ripped him open from throat to chest. He so rarely traveled around the mortal realm that he had never really tasted strong mortal alcohol, and therefore wasn't aware of his own lack of tolerance. After only a few gulps, he was sliding down the plum blossom tree. The great weight of an endless lifetime dragged him inexorably downward. Past and present blurred together. He could no longer count the number of times he had endured parting and death all alone. Reflecting on all these memories made his chest burn the same way the alcohol did. There, beneath the plum blossom tree, Wei fell into a drunken stupor. He lay insensible for 3 days and 3 nights. On the 4th morning, when the sunlight stabbed his eyes, he had the sudden sense that something was off. He sat up and found he'd been taken inside the hut. Just then, someone moved to block the morning light spilling in through the window. Shen San was there, observing him closely, arms crossed in front of his chest. Slowly, he said, "I only brought 2 jars of wine. How dare you drink and spill an entire jar while I was gone?" Wei looked up at him in disbelief. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Didn't you leave? Somehow, Shensan seemed to hear his thoughts. I went to buy salt on the other side of the mountain. The salt jars in the kitchen here were all nearly empty. It's not like I can make some appear out of thin air like you, Yao Xiang. After saying all that, he seemed angry. He stood up wearily and walked out. Panicked, Wei also got to his feet, not even knowing if he wanted Shensan to leave or stay. With his brain still mush from his bout of drunkenness, the poor, lonely ghost finally followed his heart for once. He reached for Shensan. Don't... Shensan's hand closed over Wei's pale wrist. You've been here all along these last few years, haven't you? Somehow you could see me, but I couldn't see you. Wei was speechless again. Oh. Shensan read the answer on his face. Expressionless, he pried Wei's fingers loose and flung his hand away. Wei's heart turned to ice. As he watched, Shensan walked to the door, resting his hands on the doorframe, and then turned back. So you really aren't human. What could Wei possibly say? The panic and emotion flooding his eyes were as stark as ebony on pristine snow. Shensan glared, then stalked out into the garden. But just when Wei thought he was really going to leave this time, there was a furious roar. Rushing outside to see what was happening, he found Shensan in a rage, battering at the plum blossom tree with his wooden sword. Do I care? Did I ever say I cared whether you were human or ghost or any other manner of monster? I came back just as I said I would, but you wouldn't see me for 3 years? 3 years, you piece of shit. I didn't say you could speak. I'm really not a plum blossom spirit. There's no use hitting the tree. Shensan paused. The tree, whose blossoms had just fallen, trembled in fear, and a heap of tender young leaves drifted to the ground. That was a part break. Part 7. If he wasn't a plum blossom spirit, then what was he? Shensan never did find out. But to be fair, Wei had never tried to find out how many times Shensan had wet his pants as a kid or how many birds' nests he'd destroyed. There was no need to know everything about Wei's past either. So after their one-sided fight and Shensan's one-sided forgiveness, the two of them made a home together. I know where this is going, and yet... I know what she's doing. I'm never going to be able to look at the name Shen Wei again in the same way, okay? She's done it. I'm dead. You can stop killing me, but she's not, because I think this has like 9 parts to it or some shit. Maybe more. Who can say? Yao Xiang enjoyed everything, however refined or crude it might be, as if it were sweet honey. He had no objections to Shensan's cured meat, dried fruit, or garden full of vegetables and fruit. When he had time, he even gave Shensan a hand with them, to put it mildly. Whenever Shensan went out to hunt or had to travel long distances to buy things, he always thought of the person waiting for him at home, which made his heart glow with warmth, like there was a little furnace inside. That warmth took the edge off the chill of the cruel world. How dare she nail domestic bliss to the wall? I am extremely fortunate in being able to say that I can verify that this is exactly what it is. She just put it on the... Okay. In time, this peaceful existence made Shensan feel as though he was losing his kung fu skills. He dedicated a significant part of each day to sword practice, but perhaps because now there was someone off to the side watching, distracting his mind and heart, his wooden sword seemed somehow seemed heavier by the day. There were days when he simply lacked the energy to continue, but he didn't think much of it. So what if he didn't have enough energy? He was retired now. All he had to do was hunt, and his remaining skills were plenty good enough for that. The two of them took their meals together and bedded down together, and in no time at all, a whole year had passed. New Year was approaching, and snow was once again falling north of the river. Shen-san disguised himself and traveled through the mountains to buy supplies at the nearest market. A snowfall was a good sign for the coming year, and the year that had just passed had been uncommonly peaceful. True, the emperor was as unreliable as ever, and true, corrupt officials continued to abuse their power, but at least the battles just past the borders had calmed down. It seemed the heavens had rewarded the people with a smooth year, and much like grass growing on the cliffside, a tiny gust of spring wind was all it took for them to start to thrive once again. The market was busier than in past years as well. Shen-san's first step was to sell his hides and mountain delicacies, after which he went in search of good food and good fun. He wanted to empty his money pouch right back out again. It wasn't long before his horse was carrying all manner of New Year's goods and snacks. Finally, when he bought all they could possibly carry, he decided to head home. He bought a few sweets that his... It's the little things, alright? It's just the little things that get glazed over, but they catch in your throat because of all the implications. He bought a few sweets that his Yao Shang liked, fresh off the stove and wrapped in thick wax paper. He tucked them inside his clothes, where they might stay warm until he got home if he rushed quickly enough. The woman selling the sweets smiled at how handsome he was and wrapped him a few extra white sugar cakes. Shen-san still had some copper coins, so he threw a handful to a beggar on the street. Then he spotted a little bookstore and decided to buy a few interesting books to take back to his Yaoshang to help keep boredom at bay. As he perused the store's wares, he stumbled across something unexpected at the bottom of the trunk, a heavily illustrated book called Tales of a Bitten Peach. This comes with a footnote. Tales of a Bitten Peach references an ancient Chinese story about a duke and his male lover who offered the duke a peach after taking a bite. Bitten peaches, like cut sleeves, can symbolize gay romance. How did I not know about this? I've never heard this, have I? I've never heard this. I knew about cut sleeves. I didn't know about the bitten peach thing. What kind of gay version of the Garden of Eden is that? What? You take a bite out of someone's peach, which could also be their ass, but, you know, it's neither here nor... What? When he opened it, he froze. The detailed pictures and text left absolutely nothing to the imagination. Is he discovering gay sex? Right now? I should probably just turn the page, but I'm beside myself. Somehow, it had managed to shamelessly sneak its way into a pile of serious literary works, where it sat, unabashed, as if it had every right to be there. I can't help but think about that. That's a, generally speaking, a metaphor for danmei novels. Snuck right in there, as if it belongs there, with all the other serious literary stuff. I see you. I see you, priest. The bookseller's eyes were keen. He came closer and murmured, "I see you're very discerning, sir. This is the only copy of this work." Shen-san burst out laughing. "This so-called work is nothing but an insult to common decency." He says that now. With a sweep of his sleeves, he left. But less than 10 minutes later, this decent individual was back. He pretended to pick through the books, looking very serious, then pulled that book out as quickly as a thief. He threw down a few coins and ran away with the book tucked close to his chest. Oh my God. Carrying this secret, he raced all the way home through the heavy snow. He and his horse were both soaked with sweat when they arrived, and between that and the freezing cold, he started to shiver uncontrollably. Afraid that he'd take seriously ill, Wei rushed to get him a change of clothes and have him take a hot bath. Shen-san, confident in his own health, paid this no mind. Instead, he chased Wei in circles, teasing him and feeding him the sweets. Shen-san wanted his Yaoshang to go to bed early so he could carefully study his new book. But to his surprise, before he got the chance to study the essence of life, illness overcame him. That night, Shen-san burned with a high fever. He traveled far and wide since his youth, and yet hadn't been sick for many years. Now he lay dazed with fever, sweat pouring constantly from him. Wei cared for him without resting or sleeping. He took off Shen-san's sweat-drenched clothes and wiped his body down. It wasn't until the latter half of the night that Shen-san's restlessness eased enough that he finally fell into a fitful sleep. Wei, afraid his fever would worsen, still didn't dare fall asleep himself. He lit an oil lamp and kept watch. Keeping an eye on the rise and fall of Shen-san's chest, he idly flipped through the books Shen-san had brought back. His eyes flickered over the book's text, but he registered not a word. It seemed he was only leafing through them to pass the time, until, under Shen-san's wet clothing, he found Tales of a Bitten Peach. Wei took a casual look, turning 5 or 6 pages before he realized exactly what he was seeing. He flung it away, then glanced guiltily at Shen-san lying beside him. Shen-san's face was a bit red, and he was completely out of it. When he showed no sign of waking, Wei held his breath for a while, restlessly smoothing his hands over the sheets. Eventually, he gathered his courage and picked up the book he had tossed aside. Cautiously turning just a few pages made him look like he was about to pass out. He kept reading, cheeks and ears flushing red. His blush deepened as his gaze landed on Shen-san, then deepened more as he glanced back at the book, and still more again when he looked back at Master Shen-san. It wasn't even Lunar New Year yet, but he'd already donned auspicious red. Fit for a wedding! Much like the snow falling outside the window, he was about to melt. Shen-san had fallen ill due to the cold entering his body. After a few days of careful care, he recovered just in time for Lunar New Year's Eve. Once he'd shaken off his weariness from being sick and was once again alive and kicking, he discovered that his treasure was missing. Only 2 people lived in the hut, and some stupid work of erotica could hardly cultivate a pair of legs for itself and run off. That left only one person who could have hidden it. Yao Shang's personality was as transparent as water. A single glance was all it took to see through him. He had only a few places to hide things, and Shen-san could have found them all with his eyes closed. He sent Wei outside on the pretext of wanting a few pretty branches of plum blossoms. But while he was still rummaging through the chests and drawers, Yao Shang suddenly returned, intending to ask Shen-san where he should put the branches. Instead, he caught Shen-san in the act of stealing the book back. Startled, Shen-san dropped the book. In those few short days, Yao Shang, who was pure as a blank sheet of paper, had read through it countless times, and the book's thread binding had already come loose. When the book hit the ground, its pages went flying, dusting the floor with elegance. The 2 of them stared at each other. Shen-san burst into laughter. His mortified Yao Shang fled. She is so good at charming, humorous, in-character, endearing hijinks. She's so good at it. We'll talk about that more after we finish the volume, but she's so good at it. I want all of it. Give it all to me. I love it so much. That was a part break. Part 8. But life was like a dream. Beautiful days were as ephemeral as bubbles. After Lunar New Year, Master Shen-san's vitality faded like smoke. He was always sleepy and had less energy by the day. One particular day, Wei had gone out and found some black and white stones, and now he sat in the garden, sanding them down into go pieces. Shen San had terrible sportsmanship. When he lost, he'd want to take back his moves. When Wei refused, Shen San would throw the pieces at him. For all Shen San's famed prowess with weapons of assassination, not a single thrown stone ever hit his Yao Xiang, thanks to Wei's ability to appear and disappear as he pleased. The result, however, was that they'd lost many of the go pieces. At this point, they no longer even had enough to play a full game. No matter how much Shen San slept, he never felt rested. Now, as he lazed in a sunbeam against the plum blossom tree, he abruptly said, "Yao Xiang, you don't have a past or a last name. Why don't you just..." Where the fuck am I? What page am I on? What's fucking happening? Why? Where? Oh, there I am. Yao Xiang, you don't have a past or a last name. Why don't you just take mine? Wei didn't say anything. He blew dust off the piece he was currently sanding, but the corner of his mouth quirked up. Mountain Ghost Wei. Such a carelessly chosen name, and a little spooky to boot. It's not a good name. We should change it. To what? Here. In this world, the mountain and seas are all connected, and lofty peaks stretch out endlessly. Why don't we add a few more strokes and make it a proper name? What do you think of this, Wei? Coming with a footnote. The character for his current name, Wei, is formed from the characters Mountain and Ghost, while Shen San's suggestion, Wei, has the added character of Wei. Both characters mean large, tall, lofty, but has a more uneven, craggy connotation, while the one he suggested is more majestic and dignified. Got you. Shen Wei. Shen San jumped up. I'll go write it down for you. Perhaps it was only that he'd gotten up too quickly, but before he even finished speaking, he stumbled. He reached out to put a hand against the plum blossom tree, but his limbs felt numb and weak. Black spots bloomed in his vision. Maybe he'd never truly recovered from the terrible chill he'd taken around the New Year. Shen San recovered, then fell sick. Fell sick, then recovered again. He never fully got better. Half of the lush garden was dedicated to medicinal herbs, but however many of them he ate, he never showed any signs of recovering. This cycle continued for over half a year. Spring turned to summer, then to autumn, and then a harsh winter was nearly on their doorstep. The prolonged illness had stripped too much weight from Shen San's frame. His strength faded more and more. It was nearly Lunar New Year again before he was able to take a few steps outside. This year, Yao Xiang adamantly refused to let him leave alone. For the first time, the two of them left the little hut deep in the mountains together, journeying to the village to purchase supplies. When they arrived, however, they found that the bustling market of past years was but a memory. All the nearby villages were deserted. When they finally encountered someone, a fleeing refugee, they learned that war had broken out in the north. The emperor and his corrupt officials had escaped to the south in a panic, abandoning the capital itself. Battle, no matter where it occurred, endangered civilians, so people left their homes behind to seek safety elsewhere. But the Yellow River was flooded, and a drought was ravaging the south. Starvation and disease were rampant. The short-lived prosperity of the previous year seemed to have been borrowed time. It had lasted long enough to give people a false sense of security, and then it shattered around them. The pair went home empty-handed. Shen San's heart bore a crushing weight the entire way. As soon as he set foot inside the thatched hut, he threw up a mouthful of blood. This time, he never got up again. In his delirium, Shen San heard weeping close to his ear, and between the sobs, words. Humans and ghosts don't belong together, and I should have never broken my oath and approached you. Appalled, Shen San was struggling against his body's weakness for even a moment of clarity when he heard the Yao say, I should have never let myself harm you. I'm leaving. Shensan somehow found the strength to reach out and grab the belt at Wei's waist. Don't you dare. You started this. If you dare to leave without warning, I'll dig out my heart and boil it. That year, the Emperor star fell. That comes with a footnote. In traditional astrology, the North Star is known as the Emperor Star, and influences on it can represent both the fate of the Emperor personally and significant outcomes for the nation as a whole. That year, the Emperor Star fell, and so did the country. Deep in the mountains, alone between the vastness of the earth and sky, a solitary ghost stood heartbroken, with nowhere to go. See, I thought that she was going to do that to me, and then from there, Shen Wei would take the name Shen Wei. That's what I thought. I thought they were going to have their domestic bliss. Something was going to go fucking wrong, as always. And then, but because of that profound experience, Shen Wei would then be like, I am going to take Shen as my name. That's what I had, which was partially right. But then she had to go and put in an actual, proposal. And no, here, let me suggest a more elegant way to put Shen Wei together and all that. So they had that before the bad thing happened. That was only a part break, by the way. That wasn't the end. Part 9. On Jingzhe, that comes with a Jingzhe. Actually, I'm not sure. I can't remember, although I feel like I've pronounced it before. That means the startling awake of insects is the third of the 24 traditional Chinese solar terms, usually around early spring when insects first leave winter hibernation, approximately March 5th through the 20th. Gotcha. On Jingzhe, that doesn't feel right. The snow along the sides of the streets melted. The bones that had hidden all winter lay bare to the shining sun. After 3 days of unconsciousness, Shensan suddenly woke up. He looked at his Yao Shang, who had been keeping watch over him, and smiled with bright eyes. I dreamed we were on a snowy mountain. His Yao forced a smile. What mountain? I think Kunlun Mountain? Shensan seemed to be staring off into the distance. He didn't see how Yao Shang trembled violently at the word Kunlun. He just kept speaking. There was a tree on the mountain. Was that your original form? Did you transform from that tree? Wei? No. Shen Wei seemed to choke on something. With difficulty, he said, no. I didn't think so. That tree looked ancient and rather ugly. You're actually the snow that covers Kunlun Mountain year-round, aren't you? A smile broke over Shensan's face. I never used to believe in gods and immortals, but I do now, a little. When I was younger, I had a wooden plaque that said, Soul Guarding. My mom said I was born with it, and she told me to take good care of it. She was afraid I wouldn't live long without it. I never believed that, but a few years ago I gave it to a tiny baby. Ever since then, my health's crumbled, year after year, and I'm at the end of my life. I brought it on myself by not listening to my elders. It has nothing to do with you. His Yao Shang's eyes were so red that they seemed about to bleed. Shensan gripped his hand tightly, giving it a shake. Shen Wei, wait for me. Don't leave. Stay here in this garden. If there is a next life, I'll come find you again, okay? His Yao Shang gave no reply. Okay. Shensan tried again. It was enough. Shensan closed his eyes, satisfied. Merely speaking those few words had exhausted him. He couldn't have lifted even a single finger again. You promised. This time you'd better keep your promise, Yao Shang. With that final thought, he nestled into Shen Wei's arms. His fingers went slack. He headed for the next life, eager to fulfill his promise. Part 10. Over the next 10 years, Shen Wei, looked far and wide for Shensan's lost wooden plaque. When he finally held the dusty wooden plaque in his hands, a light shone on it as though it were divine. Shen Wei leaped up into the clouds. From there, he saw a weak but identical light glowing in the mortal realm, as if it and the wooden plaque were echoing each other, connected despite the distance. Turning invisible, he followed the light. It led him to a newborn boy. The infant's eyes hadn't opened yet, but the curve of his lips was already familiar. Shen Wei reached out as if to touch the child's face, but then seemed to remember something. Dejected, he withdrew his hand. He turned and morphed into flowing light, then flew toward the peak of Kunlun Mountain. Sealed atop the mountain was a descendant of the mystic white tiger, who had been sleeping there for tens of thousands of years. Shen Wei hung the wooden plaque around the beast's neck, then gently stroked its head. He wiped away its early memories, leaving only those of its master, then undid the seal. You can protect him from now on. And so, the soul guarding order came to be. Let me just, okay, all right. We're almost at the end of this bonus story. So we'll get there, and then we'll take a break. Because I'm going to need to walk that one off. Part 11. The first guardian had only one flaw. He just wouldn't settle down. At 30 years old, all his peers were married and close to having grandsons, but he was still frittering his life away, a silver-tongued flirt. Sorry! I just got it! I just realized why he's a flirt who can't fucking settle down. He's not gonna settle down. Of course he's not gonna settle down. What are you talking about? His soul on some level is always waiting for Shen Wei. He's not gonna commit to anybody else. He's just gonna flirt with them. He's not gonna be serious with anybody. Are we kidding? Of course he's a serial flirt. Jesus fucking... Oh. He wandered the land, sometimes stirring up scandal. Every time his family inquired, the shameless thing would reply with, I feel like I made a vow with someone in a previous life. I have to wait for them, not me getting it 2 seconds before she tells me. I'm all right. I'm okay. He held out for that vow from his previous life until his 31st year, when his mother fell ill. Nothing could cure her, and the end of her life was drawing near. On her deathbed, she held his hand and told him she could not rest easy. Hearing that, he glanced out the window, as though someone would come for him at that very moment. But though he waited a long time, there was nothing outside but a branch of plum blossoms on the verge of withering and falling. Just making a mental note to talk about. later on in the stream. His heart dropped. If I went back and read this whole thing, would Plum Blossom mentions leap out and punch me in the face? His heart dropped, as if he had lost something important. For a while, he was lost in a daze. Finally, this lifelong bachelor relented. His family was delighted. They had long since found a suitable family for him and immediately sent someone to serve as matchmaker. The celebrations were as joyous as could be. The bride, swathed in red silk, was elegant and dignified as she held his hand. Elegant and dignified? You've got to be fucking kidding. She seemed to be quivering like a butterfly. Agitation gripped him, but for what reason he could not say. Sensing something, he suddenly turned and looked back. But there was nothing to see except a courtyard full of guests, and nothing to hear except the sound of drums and gongs. What a beautiful, auspicious day. First, bow to the heavens and earth. Part 12. We have art, by the way. Actually, we have art of that moment in particular. Because they were like, we're going to give you all the very specific bits of art that you want, and then we're going to choose the ones that are going to hurt your feelings the most. In the yard of the little thatched hut, don't do this to me. In the yard of the little thatched hut, there was one more jar of wine. After witnessing a beautiful wedding, Shen Wei returned to the hut alone. He dug the wine out and drank it in the celebration of the marriage. He was still a lightweight. Even the thousands of arrows piercing his heart didn't keep him from falling drunk. In his stupor, even as he forgot who and where he was, he seemed to find himself back at that day before the reincarnation cycle, when he had made his vow with Shenong. He seemed to hear that great sage sigh. It's for your own good that I forbade you to see him. Part 13. Very short. In tens of thousands of years, that was the only time he crossed the line. It was nearly his undoing. The great sage Shenong surely was great, glorious, and correct. That's the end of that bonus story. We're on page 391 for the start of the next bonus story, which is called Pocket Dimension. I am going to go reheat my tea and potentially pace around my house and make sure all the windows are closed before I scream at the top of my lungs. I'll be right back. And when we come back, we'll read Pocket Dimension. Okay? All right. Awesome. Great. I'll be right back. And we're back. So, we're here after I did a couple laps around my house on page 391 for part 1 of Pocket Dimension. It's separated into parts, much like the previous one was. Then click here, and then you just need to set a pin. Zhao Yunlan started to pass the phone to Shen Wei, then changed his mind and held onto it. Forget it, I'll set one for you. You can never think of anything new anyway. Shen Laoshe was firmly set in his ways. Every last one of his passwords was set as the unit number of their home. He had absolutely no concept of cybersecurity. Good thing you don't have much money, Zhao Yunlan said. At the day-to-day level, Comrade Shen Wei showed every sign that he really knew how to enjoy life. Having turned his attention from manipulating the 3 realms to eating, dressing, and living well, he was more than prepared for the task. Looking at the bigger picture, however, it was clear that Shen Wei had never truly engaged with the world. In tumultuous times, he'd hole up somewhere on a mountain. In times of peace, he'd rent some random place and live there for a while. Despite all his years wandering around the mortal realm, he had no savings or assets, never mind real estate or housing. To this day, other than his salary card, he didn't have a single penny to his name. Could never be me. I tell you what, I'm functionally immortal, bitch. I am amassing a respectable, beautiful home and spreading my wealth around. I'm starting charities. I'm I don't know, making stuff. I'm making sure that all of my friends are taken care of, even though I know that they're going to die and I'm going to live on beyond them. I still have that. I have that cycle. I have some beautiful cycle of people and a place and things and stuff. Could never be me. As for all the famous mountains and rivers of the world, well, the government ran all of As for all the famous mountains and rivers of the world, well, the government ran all of that now, and he certainly didn't get a cut of the tourism money. Here, let me teach you how to send red envelopes again. Zhao Yunlan hooked an arm over Shen Wei's shoulder, ruining his elegant pose. Under the pretext of teaching, he took Shen Wei's phone and sent himself a red envelope, and then, very pleased with himself, accepted it. Congratulations are in order. This generation's final remaining antique has officially entered the age of mobile payment. Not again. His phone had started ringing before he'd even finished speaking. Zhao Yunlan glanced at it, but he didn't want to answer, so he put the phone face down. But the caller refused to give up. They called 3 times in a row before realizing he was ignoring them and calling his office landline. Zhao Yunlan stepped over a little sofa and poked Da Qing, who was busy grooming himself. Damn fatty, pick up the phone! With Shen Wei there, Da Qing didn't dare express his fury. He leaped onto the desk, tail swishing in outrage, and slapped the phone, pretending it was Zhao Yunlan's face. Hello, Special Investigations. Huh? Good afternoon, sir. You're looking for Bureau Chief Zhao? I'm afraid he said he's not here at the moment. Zhao Yunlan had a sinking feeling. He flipped his phone back over and saw that not all the calls had been from the same person. The last 2 were from his dad. All he could do was get up, head aching, and drag himself over to the desk. Don't these monsters have anything better to do than pull strings through my dad? The Special Investigations Department in the Mortal Realm, otherwise known as the Soul Guarding Order. I'm still not... had always been a combined daycare and labor reform center. Other than Xiaogo, who was a mortal, and comrades like Wang Zheng and Sung Zan, who had been taken in by the Guardian, everyone at the SID could be divided into 2 categories. Those like Zhuhong and Lin Jing, who had been sent by their elders or family to gain some practical experience, and those like Chu Shujia, who were there to serve out a sentence. Since the Soul Guarding Order's original purpose was coordinating between the three realms and maintaining peace in the mortal realm, they often had to clean up after all kinds of violent monsters that were on the run in the mortal realm, all while following mortal laws and regulations. It was a thankless job, and their boss was a mortal. Working under him didn't do their cultivation any good, so hardly anyone with an actual skill had wanted to sign up. But everything had changed now. The Great Seal had gone out with a bang, the 4 hallowed artifacts had returned to their places, the new reincarnation cycle had been made complete, the King of the Gwei had become a god, and Kunlun had returned. None of this was widely publicized, but it also wasn't a secret among those in the know in the three realms. Overnight, the tiresome job of working at the SID became a highly coveted golden post. Now everyone wanted to get their foot in the door so his immortal aura might rub off on them. Zhao Yunlan, annoyed beyond bearing, rejected every single applicant with the excuse of, there's a limit to how many names can fit on the Soul Guarding Order. The order couldn't fit that many names, but the Special Investigations Department, an executive branch on the government, certainly could. As a result, in order to have some kind of link to the Soul Guarding Order, those with brains started to make use of their connections. Using their influence, they managed to have the Special Investigations Department in Dragon City changed into the Special Investigations Bureau headquarters, with regional offices in various other cities. It all sounded very official. Just like that, Director Zhao, who spent his days coasting by at 9 University Road, suddenly found himself with a new title, Bureau Chief Zhao. This year, for the first time since they'd been upgraded to the Special Investigations Bureau, they were hiring. Zhao Yunlan, who'd been living a peaceful life caring for his vegetable garden, received orders to leave his little attic and properly oversee their expansion. New hires might not be able to enter the Soul Guarding Order, but they would still fall under the umbrella of regional offices. Zhao Yunlan didn't want to hire just anyone. He'd maxed out his quota for employees without brains, and with their limited hands on deck in the main office, hiring on a large scale was unrealistic. With that in mind, for this first round, they'd restricted the applicant pool by distributing a limited number of applications to the various Yao tribes and cultivating sects so that they could oversee the initial round of vetting candidates. The result? Venerable masters from all over had started showing off their skills by finding ways to use them to acquire even a few more applications. Hello? Zhao Yunlan picked up the phone lazily, then sighed. Aren't you retired? Why are you worrying about this instead of organizing dances in the public square for middle-aged ladies? That comes with a footnote. Plaza dancing is a trend where dancers, mostly middle-aged women, gather in public areas to perform group choreography to a variety of music. Square dancing is the first thing that comes to mind, and that just shows that I grew up in Texas. Daching's ears pricked up to listen in on the long... Oh, no, wait, sorry, I skipped a line. Who reached out to you to get an in? Daching's ears pricked up to listen in on the long, spirited lecture coming from the other end of the line. At first, Zhao Yunlan tried to interrupt and explain himself with, I really didn't, but to no avail. He gave up and leaned against the desk, bored. His gaze traveled from the ceiling all the way to Shen Laoshe's clean, crisp sleeve. He was seriously starting to miss Shenong's mortar. At least that stupid Mr. Bowl hadn't fancied himself an orator. This retired old comrade had recently been on the receiving end of many random visits. After discovering why, he was incensed. In the year of our Lord 2018, people would still go to all this trouble just to get more applications. What was the world coming to? So here he was on the phone, giving Zhao Yunlan a thorough tongue lashing. Zhao Yunlan responded in the flat monotone of someone reciting scriptures. Yes, I know. You're right. No, I'm not trying to use the situation for my own benefit. I really do have limited resources. If too many people apply, we won't be able to get to all of them. No, my morals haven't been corroded. We haven't had any acid rain in Dragon City. No, I don't spend all day being a smart aleck. I spend some time every day facing the wall in earnest self-reflection. Prevention is the best cure, really. If you don't believe me, ask Shen Wei. Someone knocked on his office door 3 times, and then Lin Jing, holding a calendar, poked his head in. He bowed to Shen Wei before saying, Thank you, Shen Laoshe. Boss, it's the Dragon Boat Festival tomorrow. On behalf of all our colleagues, I'm here to ask if we're getting anything for the holiday. Zhao Yunlan, with his phone tucked between his ear and his shoulder, had 0 patience left. He pointed to the door. Everyone's getting a notice on how to have a morally honest and frugal holiday. Out! Representative Lin was chased away, tail drooping. He had barely left when Zhu Hong knocked and came in. Thank you, Shen Wei. Bureau Chief Zhao, my fourth uncle asked me to invite you to dinner. A few Yao tribe elders all want to pay you a visit. She sighed. I'm just the messenger. I know they're really annoying. If you don't want to go, then don't. Don't feel obliged on my account. Zhao Yunlan was close enough to Zhu Hong that he could turn her down without worrying about fake pleasantries, but the Yao were family to Kunlun. He couldn't blatantly disrespect the Yao elders. Zhao Yunlan could only give her a resigned wave. Turning around, Zhu Hong nearly ran into Chu Shujia, who looked like he was in a hurry. He barely had time to nod at her. Be careful, he told her, then added, We've got a problem, Lao Zhao. Someone's messing with the application forms. Shen Wei, who'd been engrossed in messing around with his phone, looked up. What's wrong? When it came to the Special Investigations Bureau, Shen Wei never spoke up unless someone asked for his input. But this time, he took an interest because he'd been the one who helped make a kind of watermark on the applications. The sole executing emissary hadn't watched over the Great Seal for over 5,000 years for nothing. He'd witnessed the rise and fall of all different tribes and clans and knew their ways. He himself was essentially a walking, talking archive of lost techniques, but since no one dared to ask to buy the intellectual property from him, the archive was still very low on funds. There are still 10 days left before the deadline, Chushu just said, but we've already received more applications than we sent out. All right, thank you, Shen Wei. Shen Wei's brows knit together. Gather them all together. I want to take a look. Zhao Yunlan put down his phone and walked over. Hey, by the way, what kind of secret code is thank you, Shen Wei? Why is everyone saying that when they come in? Said Shen Wei. For the red envelopes you just sent us, of course, Chushu just said. Our bonus for the Dragon Boat Festival, right? Zhao Yunlan grabbed Shen Wei's phone to find that in the time he'd been wrapped up on a call, Shen Wei Tongshui had mastered the technique of mobile payments and diligently done some after-class practice. He'd been going down his contacts list and sending each person in the Special Investigations Bureau a red envelope. It wasn't the kind where you sent it into the group chat for everyone to fight over. Zhao Laosha hadn't reached that lesson yet. No, Shen Wei had sent each one individually and had only made it halfway through his contacts before running out of money. His Shen Laosha, because that's what he did. That's how he referred in the mountain spirits. His Shen Laosha viewed cash the same way he viewed in-game currency, and not even the kind you had to buy, but the kind the game gave you for free to start. When Zhao Yunlan said nothing, Shen Wei gave him a quizzical look. It's fine. Zhao Yunlan dragged the word out for 1 entire kilometer. Then, standing 1 kilometer away, he sent back a pained smile across the distance. If you run out of money, I'll transfer you some more. Go on, finish sending the red envelopes. You sure are a quick learner. And so, everyone received a holiday bonus for that year's Dragon Boat Festival, sponsored by an anonymous Mr. Zhao. The heavens themselves would have been moved by the gesture. Part 2. All the applications that had raised concerns were stacked up in the basement. There were no lights down there, but it wasn't dark. The silvery glow of all the applications together was as bright as a row of incandescent bulbs. Wang Zheng and Sung Zan worked overtime throughout the day, and when Zhao Yunlan and the others came down the stairs, they had just finished separating the applications by different tribes and regions. The application's design was a work of art. They'd been handed out in white envelopes secured with little seals, which had also been made by Shen Wei. The application belonged to whomever could open the seal. Even if someone else later managed to get their hands on it, that person's information wouldn't be recorded. It was a way of doing preliminary screening since it wasn't realistic to organize a written test. To start with, potential applicants were masters of different things and came from different backgrounds, so it wasn't fair to have them sit through a standardized theory exam. What was more, many who cultivated way out in the middle of nowhere couldn't read simplified Chinese. Song Zan said, Bureau Chief Zhao, taking the sum of the parts into consideration, we sent out 729 applications, and we have received more than 1,560 back. Sangzan! We have been working on our pronunciation. That's a big difference, Zhao Yunlan asked. Yes, what a splendid sight, Zhangzan sighed. In his years at the Special Investigations Bureau, Sangzan had been diligent and keen. Through industrious work and dedication, he now spoke Mandarin fluently, successfully getting rid of his slutterer moniker. But then he'd set an even higher goal for himself. He'd started learning Chengyu. That comes with a footnote. Chengyu are Chinese proverbs or idioms, usually based on quotes from literature or historical quotations, and condensed to 4 characters. Educated people usually have a good Chengyu vocabulary and are able to apply them with ease. We've gone into higher learning? But then he'd set an even higher goal for himself. He'd started learning Chengyu and was constantly trying to incorporate them into his everyday speech and testing his colleagues' patience in a whole new way. Zhao Yunlan was used to it by now. He automatically ignored all the proverbs and idioms in Sangzan's speech and gave him a wave. Thanks for your hard work. How dare you say that? It was no trouble at all, Sangzan responded, smiling. All I have is the coat on my back, so if I can help, this much is like a drop in the bucket. Oh my god. For fuck's sake, Wang Zheng didn't even stop him. All she did was stand next to him and smile indulgently. Okay, as long as you're happy, said Zhao Yunlan, giving up. Hurry up and clock out, you two. The average person wouldn't be able to produce a knockoff of Shen Wei's anti-fraud watermark, especially not one so similar to the real thing. While Zhao Yunlan had been speaking with the couple, Shen Wei had already gone through all the applications in the pile. Shen She, what do you think? Chu Shuzhe asked. To be honest, I really can't figure out the difference. Shen Wei didn't say anything. After some consideration, he suddenly waved his hand and rearranged them from the categories Wang Zheng and Sangzan had sorted them into. The glowing applications fluttered upward like butterflies. In a dazzling show of light, they fell neatly into 2 piles with a whoosh. One pile was noticeably higher. Zhao Yunlan hiked up his pants and knelt, picking out a few from each pile to look at. He pointed at the taller pile. These ones are all the same? Shen Wei nodded. Huh. Aren't they all the same? Chu Shuzhe asked, completely mystified. Isn't that why we can't tell if they're real or not? No, said Shen Wei. He's talking about the seal on each application. It turned out that the seals on every application looked the same, but the methods of opening them varied. That meant they could get applicants with a variety of qualifications, and it would prevent applicants from sharing answers. When the applications had been sent out, different seals were sent to different tribes. For instance, the snake tribe was familiar with water, so it wouldn't make sense to force them to use the true flames of Samadhi to open the seal. While all the seals on the submitted applications had been opened, the tiny bit of aura lingering on them was enough for an examiner to see the problem. All the seals on the applications in the taller pile were identical. They had clearly all been copied from one original. When we sent out the applications, I made a record of where each one was sent, said Shen Wei. We can see which tribe received the original of this one. Chu Shuzhe's eyes bulged. Hang on, each one of over 700 applications is different, and you kept a record of them all? Yes. Shen Wei adjusted his glasses. And? What, like it's hard? The thought left Chu Shuzhe speechless. No wonder there'd been no mention of paying this consultant. With this kind of output, they would have had to auction off Kunlun Jun to cover the fee. Shen Woods! Oh, Shen Woods. Oh, that was good. Now that they had a starting point, things were much easier. A check of Shen Wei's records revealed that the application in question had been sent to a Yao tribe, specifically the water tribe of the South Sea. Zhao Yunlan got up. Tell Zhuhong to call her 4th uncle. Overall, there were 4 types of Yao. Those who flew, those who walked, those who swam, and those who cultivated from inanimate natural objects. From there, they further divided into individual tribes, each living in different areas. Since Zhuhong was from the Snake tribe and their chief 4th uncle was both good at getting things done and fair in his dealings, the Snake tribe was said to be both privileged and capable. As a result, they were particularly respected. In just a few short years, they'd come out on top among all the Yao. Whenever something came up, the Yao turned to Fourth Uncle. Fourth Uncle arrived at 9 University Road less than 5 minutes after receiving his niece's call, despite the scorching sun. After being given an overview of the situation, he first apologized to Kunlun Jun. He had too much shame to ask for more applications, so he turned, rolled up his sleeves, and personally set off to the South Sea to capture the barnacle responsible for the whole mess. Part 3. Actually, the more I think about it, the stranger this situation seems, Shen Wei said that night while slicing ham in the kitchen. There are always those with stronger abilities than others. I can't say for certain that there's no one out there who could copy something I made, but that envelope was quite crude. A single touch would tell any true master that each seal was different. How could they be so stupid as to forge hundreds of copies of the same one? Zhao Yunlan leaned against the cabinet. Rather than helping out, he was making more work for Shen Wei. Every time Shen Wei cut a slice of ham, Zhao Yunlan ate it right off the cutting board. It's the little touches of domesticity. The very, very true to life domesticity. What if they used some sort of powerful artifact? None of the Yao are what they used to be, but each tribe has its own long-standing history. Maybe someone has a fun toy that's been passed down through the generations. Shen Wei finished slicing the ham. He paused and considered that notion, then turned to grab a ceramic plate. But I can't think of anything powerful enough to duplicate a seal made by the soul-executing emissary, a king of the Gui, but used on such a menial task. What kind of artifact could it be? A Pongu brand photocopier? Shen Wei turned back with the plate for the ham, only to realize that the cutting board was empty. When Shen Wei fell silent, Zhao Yunlan followed his gaze, hastily finished chewing, and swallowed the evidence. Then, the very picture of innocence, he stretched out his back. "Isn't it salty?" Shen Wei inquired. Zhao Yunlan was about to flee the kitchen to avoid punishment when his heart suddenly skipped a beat. Shen Wei looked up at the same moment. The two of them glanced southward. "What was that?" Shen Wei asked. "I don't know, but..." Zhao Yunlan squinted. "It feels like the three sovereigns." The phone cut him off. "Hello, Zhuhong?" "Lao Zhao, something's happened to my fourth uncle." "Slow down and explain." "You know how he went to the South Sea? My tribe just contacted me and said the lamp representing the chief's life has gone out. My uncle, he..." "Calm down for a second," Zhao Yunlan said. "When a great Yao dies, there's always some kind of portent to announce it. It wouldn't happen so quietly. Maybe there's been an accident that's blocking his connection to his lamp. Ask your tribe to bring the lamp here, and Shen Wei and I will go take a look." There was no time for dinner now. Shen Wei hurriedly packed his half-prepared ingredients into the fridge. They'd just have to get takeout when they got back. One of the Snake Tribe's elders arrived promptly with Fourth Uncle's lamp of life. With it in hand, Shen Wei and Zhao Yunlan teleported straight to the South Sea. The tourism boom in the South Sea meant that things had been steadily going downhill for the South Sea Water Tribe. Young Yao, drawn to the dazzling human world with its sunshine, beaches, and coconut trees, no longer did anything but wear floral shorts and fool around among the tourists. But when these tourists' vacations were over, they went back home and got back to work or school. The naive little Yao, on the other hand, just moved on to the next wave of tourists and kept playing. As a result, they weren't learning a damn thing, and their cultivation was suffering too. Their shrimp veins and fish scales were now tanned from the sun. Theoretically, if the Snake Tribe chief was paying a personal visit, these good-for-nothing Yao were supposed to welcome him with a banner and fanfare. Who'd lent them the courage to act out? Were they so high on fresh water that their egos were now badly overinflated? Either way, Zhao Yunlan couldn't figure it out. When they arrived at the South Sea, Zhao Yunlan realized the local water tribe was in total disarray. The Yao in charge, upon hearing that Kunlun Jun and the King of the Gui were there, nearly peed their swim trunks. They knelt shirtless on the beach, kowtowing with their bare backs to the sky. Each of them had a huge letter inked on their back. Collectively, the message read, "Our crimes are severe. Please punish us, O great immortal." It was such a sight that the hermit crabs were too fearful to even dare poke their heads out. "Oh, get up. What are you doing? If you have something to say, just say it. Don't embarrass me like this." From his seat up on a cloud, Zhao Yunlan cringed at the sight. He and Shen Wei couldn't even get off the cloud. The beach was so packed that there was nowhere to set foot. "I don't get it. All this feudalistic nonsense has been buried for 100 years, but it's still somehow alive and well here with you, Yao. Please go educate yourselves." The South Sea was rich in resources, and there were ample varieties of seafood, or rather, of the water tribe. This was a mixed species tribe created when the chiefs of each of the tribes had banded together to form an alliance. The one in charge was a 3,000-year-old sea turtle, and the second in command was a 2,000-year-old sea cucumber. The pair was truly a golden duo. Neither of them thought the other's explanations were too slow. Zhao Yunlan listened as they sobbed their way through the story, but by the time they were only halfway through, his soul had already made 8 trips around the 36 Great Mountains. His gaze was distant. For the first time ever, he thought Go Cheng Chung was actually a very bright child. Shen Wei, thankfully, had the patience to pay proper attention. "You're saying that the elder in charge of keeping watch over the South Sea's forbidden area didn't receive any applications, so he stole one and went into the forbidden area and made copies." The sea turtle in charge sighed. "Exactly. His original form is a barracuda. He sold the fake applications for money so he could sell... Ooh, betel? It's gotta be betel, right? Betel nuts? Because it can't be betel. It's not spelled the right... Betel nuts? Yeah, I don't know why my mouth's tripping over me. Betel nuts wholesale. He's already escaped to avoid punishment." "Never mind what he was trying to sell. Let's set that aside," Shen Wei said. "Can you tell us what your tribe keeps watch over? How were the applications copied?" Looking pained, the sea cucumber replied, "My lord, none of us even dare approach the forbidden area other than the Barracuda tribe, who have always been the ones to stand watch. It's said that some sort of ancient artifact is sealed inside there. Oh, and I should mention that the great snake tribe chief came here earlier. He was annoyed that we couldn't explain in more detail, so he decided to go see for himself. We didn't dare stop him. But soon after he entered, an earthquake shook the South Sea, and the great chief hasn't been seen since. We still don't know what's going on." Shen Wei glanced back at Zhao Yunlan, who roused himself from his daydreaming and stood up straight. "Right then, that's enough bullshit. Lead the way." By that point, it was late at night. The Dragon Boat Festival was still underway, and there was no sign of the moon. The ocean looked bottomless, but something seemed to be stirring in its depths. Something restless and agitated, creating wave after wave in perfect time with Zhao Yunlan's heartbeat. Their little party was still 1,000 kilometers away from their destination when the South Sea tribe leaders, who had gone pale from fright, stopped dead. Nothing could persuade them to proceed any further. The second in command said, "It used to be that during the holidays we felt brave enough to visit the forbidden area and do a lap to check things out. But then that stupid fish touched something he shouldn't have, and ever since, the forbidden area has grown scarier by the day. At first, it didn't get too frightening until we got within just 5 kilometers, but now, even from hundreds of kilometers away, we can hardly breathe from terror." As soon as he got those words out, his eyes rolled back in his skull. Unconscious now, he began to sink, as if deficient in both blood and chi. A black shadow flashed in Shen Wei's mind, and the soul-executing blade materialized, extending several meters out. With the blade still sheathed, he fished the sea cucumber back out of the water. The sea turtle was in no state of mind for further pleasantries. He bowed to Shen Wei from a safe distance, then resumed his original form, picked up his partner, and shot off like a torpedo. The sea turtle and a cucumber. Sea turtle, sea cucumber. 2 shadows flew swiftly over the dark waves, heading for the forbidden area of the South Sea. The closer they got, the calmer the water became. By the time they were 8 kilometers out, the water's stillness was downright unnatural, as though a pair of invisible hands had stretched its surface taut. It was like a pool of dead water, unbroken by even a single ripple. In no time at all, Zhao Yunlan and Shen Wei reached the center of the forbidden area and found themselves confronted by a peculiar vortex. Not quite 2 meters in diameter, it swirled with incredible speed, like a needle embedded right in the sea floor. Knives couldn't cut through water, but it was as though something had cut a circle around the vortex, separating the water within from the water without. The water inside swirled rapidly, but the water outside remained unmoving. The barest wisp of black smoke, hardly noticeable, seemed to hang above the vortex. It echoed the soul-executing blade in a way that said they shared one source. "If this is something left behind by a sage from the era of chaos, we might not get along," Shen Wei said. "Let's forget everything else. The traces I left all over that application awakened whatever is sealed here. With the seal already loose, Fourth Uncle's arrival only added fuel to the fire. The seal's probably done for. Do you have any recollection of what's behind it?" Zhao Yunlan's brow furrowed in thought, but he shook his head. "I've never seen it, but..." He broke off as something flashed inside his bag. It was Fourth Uncle's lamp of life, a small candle encased protectively in a dragon's pearl. It resembled a crystal light, and now that it was flashing like it was... and right now it was flashing like it was about to die. Its weak light cast a beam across the water's surface, pointing straight into the vortex. With no warning, the dragon pearl disintegrated, and the dwindling flame gave a single flicker. Zhao Yunlan reflexively cupped his hand around it just as the vortex below them exploded. All the stars in the sky above suddenly seemed like dust blowing in the wind. Shen Wei pulled Zhao Yunlan into his arms at once, holding his long blade in front of them both. In an instant, it became shockingly apparent that something was deeply wrong. He and Zhao Yunlan weren't actually touching, despite how close together they were. Shen Wei whipped his head around in shock. There was some sort of clear film in between them. Zhao Yunlan said something, but the sound didn't penetrate the invisible barrier. Shen Wei read the words off Zhao Yunlan's lips. This bubble is... Bubble? Shen Wei looked around. Fourth Uncle's lamp of life was reflected everywhere, revealing what might have been infinite layers of clear film, like soap bubbles clustered together. Vague mirages flickered across the surfaces of the bubbles, reflecting both Shen Wei and Zhao Yunlan an endless number of times. It was a frightening sight. Only a few short moments later, the two of them, each trapped in their own bubble, started to drift apart. As the distance between them grew, Shen Wei's eyes went red. Drawing his blade, he slashed at the bubble. There was a boom as the soul-executing blade, which could cut through anything in the world, sank into the mud. Countless eerie bubbles were shattered, only for even more to rise from the seabed. The ocean's surface began to roil with mountain-sized waves, roaring at a volume much like the sound when Pangu had first split apart chaos. The mountains shook, the sea rolled, and Shen Wei's sight went black. Part 4? When Zhao Yunlan jolted awake, he was still holding the short candle of the lamp of life, with its pea-sized flame. He moved slightly and instantly froze in place. His expression was one of absolute shock. Slowly, he looked down at his right foot, his sprained right foot. Kunlun Jun's body couldn't be so much as scratched. Heat and cold alike posed no threat. It had been 6 years since Zhao Yunlan's divine spirit was awakened, and he'd nearly forgotten even the sensation of a mosquito's bite. How had he managed to sprain his ankle here in the South Sea? Thank you for telling me specifically that it's been 6 years since the end of the main story. Well, this was new. He grimaced and probed at his ankle. Nothing seemed broken, so he took another ginger stab at moving. Bracing himself with a hand against the wall beside him, he stood up. As he did, he noticed that something else was off. His limbs felt heavy, as if they weren't his own. Kunlun Jun's ability to fly and pass through the ground, moving freely through any part of the three realms, had disappeared. What was more, clarity had stopped ticking, and the talismans in his wallet had all turned into ordinary paper and were completely unresponsive. He couldn't summon his whip. Even the soul-guarding order, to which he was connected by blood, lay silently in his palm like any regular piece of wood. Zhao Yunlan held up Fourth Uncle's lamp of life so he could glance around. Wherever he was, it was extremely desolate. As far as the eye could see, not a single streetlight was lit. Lopsided houses in varying states of disrepair lined the streets, and the air was thick with dust. It was like an ancient ruin. He took a few limping steps forward, then had to stop to dump sand out of his shoes. Every breath was a major effort that felt like inhaling needles. Waves of pain stabbed at his heart. In the old days, he might not have been the healthiest mortal around, but he hadn't had this many problems. Was he just out of practice? Dragging the weight of his body along, Zhao Yunlan did a loop around the street. His cell phone had no signal, but when he looked, it still displayed the time. 8:45 p.m. The ham he'd filched before dinner was barely enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. As the pain in his chest and sprained ankle eased, this mortal body began reminding him exactly what it was like to have stomach problems. A meow came from somewhere. Zhao Yunlan looked up and saw a black cat jump from the withered tree next to him onto the nearest roof. It pattered across the top of a dilapidated wall at a leisurely stroll, tail upright. There was no mistaking it. The cat looked like a much younger Da Qing, with his neck and waist clearly defined, as Da Qing's had been before he gained weight. Out of sheer habit, Zhao Yunlan reached out to play with him, whistling in his direction, like a pervert! The instant the cat looked over, dark green eyes flashing, Zhao Yunlan saw a paper talisman in his mouth. But before he could get a good look, the world started spinning. The cat disappeared, and the streets twisted together, contorting as the ground fell out from under his feet. He landed heavily, freshly spraining his right ankle, which had finally stopped hurting. Zhao Yunlan hissed a curse, then had a sudden thought. He got his phone out again and took another look at the time. 8:35 p.m. It was now 10 minutes earlier? Striding through the streets, Zhao Yunlan counted down the time on his phone. 10 minutes later, the black cat appeared again, jumping out from the same place in the same pose. This time, Zhao Yunlan didn't bother the bizarre little animal. Instead, he leaned against a corner and observed. The cat, talisman in its mouth, took 5 steps, and once again, everything began to spin. Zhao Yunlan was whisked right back to 10 minutes earlier again. This repeated 2 or 3 more times. How did we wind up in an aquatic time loop? Zhao Yunlan hit the point where he didn't want to stand up anymore. His shoe was too hard to take off. This world was like a song on repeat, a song that was about 10 minutes long and didn't take up too much space, and yet he was stuck here as it repeated again and again. He felt along the wall, then suddenly remembered the weird bubbles that had appeared when he and Shen Wei had been separated. Bubbles. Time that kept looping. Abruptly, Zhao Yunlan got to his feet again. After jumping the sand out of his shoes, he walked quickly through the streets. The moment the cat appeared, he tucked the lamp of life between his lips, jogged a few steps, and between putting his hands on the roof and making use of the low wall, he managed to leap up onto the rooftop. He scooped up the black cat, took the talisman from its mouth, and backflipped down toward the ground. Before he even landed, the time loop reached its end. Zhao Yunlan immediately touched the life lamp's flame to the talisman, which caught fire. A noise rang out like something shattering. The black cat in his arms melted into smoke. Zhao Yunlan stumbled a few steps before finding his footing. When he looked back up, he saw that he hadn't returned to that same starting point. Other things had changed in the street before him, too. A street light was now on, there was far less dust in the air, and the tree was no longer barren. It boasted only a few leaves, but at least it was alive. Dusting off his clothes, Zhao Yunlan said, "So that's what this is. Here I thought the South Sea actually had something precious, but it turns out it's just trouble." It was common knowledge that time couldn't flow backward, and a person couldn't jump randomly within his own timeline. Within the same dimension, the laws of cause and effect were immutable. Back before Kunlun Jun had been awakened, Zhao Yunlan had once traveled 11 years back to Renwu year, except he hadn't, not really. Shen Nong had just put an 11-year mini-cycle into Nuwa's scale, creating a pocket dimension. It had been an illusion that was very similar to, but different from, reality. He had simply been inside that pocket dimension for a while. When Fourth Uncle had given him Nuwa's scale, Zhao Yunlan had already unknowingly walked into that pocket dimension. Within it, time had reset when it finished its 11 years, so since Zhao Yunlan had been inside, he had gone back 11 years too. He hadn't returned to reality until Shen Wei broke that dimension with the soul-executing blade. The bubble that had separated him and Shen Wei just now was the same as that 11-year cycle. Every bubble was a world set to repeat over and over for a certain span of time. Some were simple and crude, repeating every 10 minutes. Some might seem incredibly real and complex, repeating only after thousands of years. So this wasn't some kind of artifact. It was simply all the remains of the sages' attempts to create the reincarnation cycle. The waste from their experiments had been sealed in the South Sea all this time until the seal had first been disturbed by the king of the Gui, and then accidentally smashed open by a great Yao, leaving it exposed to the mortal realm. Zhao Yunlan looked up at the streetlight. "I knew you wouldn't leave me any inheritance," he thought. "Just a bunch of messes for me to clean up." At this point, there was no knowing where Shen Wei was, so there was no point in hoping for rescue by his blade. No, Zhao Yunlan was going to have to shatter each tiny looping world from within. It wasn't complicated. Every pocket dimension had a point that connected it to the real world, and that point was how Zhao Yunlan got in. Once that point was found and destroyed, the pocket dimension would collapse, unable to sustain itself. For example, the connection point in that 11-year cycle had been the mysterious record of ancient secrets. Zhao Yunlan had owned a copy in the real world, and there was another copy in the little cycle. When he entered the cycle with the book, the two copies overlapped, connecting the pocket dimension and the real world. Illusion and reality intersected. At the time, Zhao Yunlan had been desperate to know what Shen Wei was hiding from him, so he kept chasing after the book. It never crossed his mind to destroy it. But if he had burned Record of Ancient Secrets as soon as he got it in the little time loop, cause and effect within the pocket dimension would have contradicted cause and effect in the real world, and the alternate world would have disintegrated. He wouldn't have needed to wait for Shen Wei's blade at all. If he had burned Record of Ancient Secrets in the little time loop, the book would have still been in his hands when he returned to reality instead of staying behind in the loop. As for the real Record of Ancient Secrets, it might have been Shenlong's mortar who had hidden it in the Special Investigations Department to begin with. Currently, all these overlapping pocket dimensions were like bubbles. Zhao Yunlan was reflected within them, and each one would take something from him as the connection point between that dimension and the real world. The now stopped clarity, the lifeless talismans, the soul-guarding order that was now just an ordinary piece of wood, the whip that couldn't be summoned, or even his powers as Kunlun. And of course, Zhao Yunlan had no way of knowing what the connecting point in each world was, so he would have to feel them out individually and destroy them to shatter the dimension. Only then would that given thing return with him to the real world. So fucking annoying, Zhao Yunlan sighed. If I'd known it was going to be like this, I would have just organized an exam. It was all this tactless South Sea water tribe's fault. When he got back, he'd eat a whole seafood feast. Part 5. Zhao Yunlan had no idea how long he'd been lingering in the countless pocket dimensions. Initially, the worlds were all simple scenes. A dilapidated road, a dark city, the countryside, underwater. There were no people to be seen, and the loops ranged from 10 minutes to 3 days. They were always based on something inconsequential he had. But it wasn't long before the pocket dimensions became increasingly complex, not to mention larger and larger. Other people started to appear, including some people he knew. The world based off Clarity, for example, looped for an entire 3 years during the lifetime of Zhao Yunlan's previous incarnation at the beginning of the Republican era. Clarity had been passed down from the previous guardian, who was his prior incarnation. He had been chasing down a demon that had kidnapped someone, taking them hostage. The watch had been smashed in the process. The hostage was a kid from an orphanage, and someone claiming to be the orphanage director rushed over to collect the child. While he was at it, he offered the services of a watchmaker he knew to fix the watch. When the repaired watch was returned, it was able to communicate between the worlds of yin and yang. It had become Clarity. Zhao Yunlan watched as his previous incarnation, who had looked identical to how he looked now, hurried to the orphanage in search of its director, only to find that the orphanage director was a short nun, not the man who had offered to fix the watch for him. Ah, Shen Wei. Zhao Yunlan caught up to his incarnation, contemplating the watch's origin. He chuckled, shaking his head. You sneaky bastard. As things progressed, the time loops grew ever longer. By the time they exceeded 50 years, Zhao Yunlan was no longer a bystander in these pocket dimensions. He found he was starting to get involved, always playing a certain role in following the pocket dimension's plot. Not every dimension came straight from his memories. Some seemed like memories from a past life, but with subtle differences. Some were of bizarre worlds with just a few familiar segments flashing through them. Zhao Yunlan rather liked the latter sort because in the course of the 5,000 years he'd spent in the reincarnation cycle, he had very few memories of Shen Wei. When Zhao Yunlan occasionally managed to catch him, it was inevitably only a brief glimpse before Shen Wei disappeared again. But in the fake worlds, Shen Wei was always right there at his side, playing different roles in his life. In those worlds, they spent a whole lifetime together until they found their own connection items and broke out of the cycle. Meanwhile, the real Shen Wei's soul-executing blade was indeed stuck in one of the worlds. But having the blade didn't mean Shen Wei dared use it. If he destroyed a pocket dimension from the outside, whatever had been copied would be trapped in that cycle forever, just like that record of ancient secrets. All in all, Zhao Yunlan escaped from 80 pocket dimensions. With each escape, the time would reset to 8:35 p.m. It was as though he had experienced the lives of all living beings in an instant. Fortunately, Kunlun Jun had already spent thousands of years in the reincarnation cycle, and despite living out lives in all these pocket dimensions, he still held his original mission firmly in hand. At last, he arrived at the 81st dimension. 81, a multiple of the auspicious number 9. Zhao Yunlan had a feeling that this dimension was the last, but he could have hardly expected This one would last 10,000 years. The endless passage of time made it impossibly close to the real world. He grew attached to it. Finally, after a series of ups and downs, he reached its end. But Zhao Yunlan still hadn't managed to identify the connection point. Everything he had on him, right down to his spine and his heart's blood, had been shattered within different pocket dimensions. What could this one possibly be? What was left? Part 6. Oh, right. There was still himself. People existed to serve the world around them. The heart existed to serve its body. Part 7. When Zhao Yunlan escaped from the last pocket dimension, all 10,000 mountains exulted. Great waves seemed to descend from the very heavens, and they parted before him as if imbued with consciousness, allowing him to rise through their midst. He registered the shrill sound of a blade descending just before the soul-executing blade manifested out of nowhere, seeming ready to carve the entire South Sea in two. Zhao Yunlan's eyes shot open. He reached down into the seething waves and grabbed the hand wielding the blade. Shen Wei! The huge wave crashed down to reveal Shen Wei underneath. He looked even more bedraggled than Zhao Yunlan, and he didn't seem to have recovered from the endless time loops yet. For a while, he was completely motionless and silent. It's okay, Zhao Yunlan told him gently. We're back. A shudder tore through Shen Wei's body, and he fell into Zhao Yunlan's arms. The soul-executing blade dropped from his exhausted hand and landed on the back of a large snake floating nearby. Zhao Yunlan let out the breath he was holding. Thankfully, Fourth Uncle's lamp of life was still burning. The old bug was still alive. Zhuhan could keep right on fooling around at the Special Investigations Bureau, with no need to return to her tribe to succeed her uncle as chief. Part 8. Huh? Oh, okay. Bright and early, back at 9 University Road, Go Cheng Chung answered a call. His tone fluctuated dramatically, ranging from shock to utter confusion and finally to embarrassment. Now he was awkwardly saying, there isn't anything I want, but thank you, boss. Really, it's okay. No, not even from duty-free stores. Please don't worry about it, as long as you're happy. All right, have fun. Have a good vacation. Before he'd even finished offering his well wishes, Chu Shuzhe and Lin Jing both stood up, slapping the table. Da Qing's fur erupted into a pom-pom. Was that Lao Zhao? Chu Shuzhe demanded. What's the meaning of this? What do you mean, have a good vacation? What's his problem? He ran off? He just ran off like that. Is there no justice in this world? Bawled Lin Jing. Da Qing jumped over from the couch. The shameless bastard! Give me the phone! Go Cheng Chung hesitantly set the receiver down. He already hung up. Call him back, Da Qing roared. If you can't reach him, call Shen Lao. To no one's surprise, Zhao Yunlan's phone was turned off with well-practiced ease. But next, something unexpected happened. Shen Lao stood barefoot on the beach. He had one hand on his collar and the other on his belt, and his face was red from the struggle. He'd rather die than do as the Romans do and change into swim trunks. What was this abomination? Such an insult to elegance. Zhao Yunlan chased after him. Just try it on once. How can you know you don't like it if you don't give it a try? I think you'll like it. Shen Wei, Xiao Wei, babe, you always wear black. Don't you get tired? Maybe a whole new world will open up in front of you. Hey, okay, you don't have to wear it. Don't jump into the sea. Shen Wei had been pursued right to the water's edge. As he stepped into the surf, his phone fell out of his pocket at the precise moment that a call came through. It rang once as it plunged to its death, making the ultimate sacrifice. The screen went black. At 9 University Road, Go Cheng Chung innocently announced, Shen Lao hung up. Da Qing completely lost it. Utterly outraged, he yowled, how could Shen Lao with his beautiful face betray us? That's it. Shit. That was Guardian. Well, I'll be damned. Huh. Should we take it? It's 5:03. I plan to be off at around like 5:30. Screw it. Let's just keep on going. We're not going to take a second break. We're just going to chat for a little bit about all of that. And then that'll be the ending to the stream today. Oh, Wolf. The beach extra was written after the series ended. Nice. So the last bubble that it was the series AU. Clever. Clever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, that's cool. And that gave the Guardian fandom so much life, they started adopting other completely unrelated series with similar vibes as Bubble AUs. No, see, this is what I love it when an author, showrunner, the powers that be, what have you, when they really just give a creative gift to a fandom. And sometimes it's like super intentional, and sometimes it's not. It just comes about from how they develop the world or something they do with the characters or something. But that is exactly the kind of thing I mean when I talk about gifts given to fans and fandom. A kind of springboard like that. Infinite possibilities that we can all just take and run with to our heart's content. That's a gift. That's such a gift. That's so cool. That was super, yeah, that was super clever. That was really great of her. Oh, damn. Oh, no, get back. You know, okay, so Wolf says one of those other series is Bayou's Detective L, which is really Zhao in a Sherlock Holmes AU. I have had Detective L sitting on my hard drive for the longest time because I've been meaning to watch it, because not only does it look right up my alley, but like, hello, Bayou, love of my life, of course. But I have not watched it yet. And there are so many things that I want to watch or play. I'm behind on a lot of video games as well over my vacation. But I swear, now I'm torn. I'm like, I need to rewatch Guardian, first of all. I need to rewatch the series. I have only seen it the one time. The reaction that you guys have is the only time I've watched Guardian, because it's really difficult. It's really difficult for me to rewatch shows that come with subtitles, because I can't just have it on to watch but also be doing things. It's something I have to sit down and like fully dedicate to, and having the time for that is a lot more difficult than something with English language or even English dub. So I still very much need to rewatch Guardian. But then, should I watch Detective L? That's what it was called, right? Yes, it was. Should I watch Detective L before or after the Guardian rewatch? Because right now, Bayou as Zhao feels rather distant because I haven't watched it in so long. So I'm more ready to be like, oh yeah, sure, Bayou, Detective L, yeah, this is acceptable to my brain. But after I rewatch Guardian, he's just going to be Zhao. But then again, if we can all just headcanon it as an AU where Zhao is Sherlock Holmes, a Sherlock Holmes type character, then why shouldn't I do? You know what? It's a win-win, I feel. I feel like no matter what I do, I just kind of win. So, Guardian, the novel, as a novel trilogy. Off the top of my head, because I've only really been contemplating my thoughts on the trilogy as a whole for the past few days, because it's been a very long 6 weeks. But off the top of my head, I did actually write a couple of things down to remember to mention. I think first up, for me, this could have been twice as long. This could have very easily been like a 6-volume story that would have given the whole world and all of the relationships and all of the characters, and of course, Shen Wei and Zhao, even more time to really sit and develop. I think the show, and I will tell you when we get into actual show spoilers, but this isn't really show spoilers. The show has 40 episodes or something like that. Obviously, the show would have to expand on the world's universe. And I think that was to great effect in the show. Because the show really builds on the SID and all of the characters within, and all of their dynamics and their own specific little things going on and all of this jazz. And you had more time to spend in the world. You had more time to spend with Shen Wei and Zhao. You just had a lot more time to really live in the place. And I did kind of miss that with the trilogy. It only being 3 volumes worth of story. There was definitely a lot of summary and telling, which, as for what I found, telling in danmei novels, which may carry on to just Chinese novels in general, but I'm not sure because I've only read danmei. Telling in danmei is much more the norm than it is in Western media. With Western books, it is, the emphasis is distinctly on show don't tell, and obviously there's still a lot of showing going on in danmei novels, but there is distinctly a lot more of deliberate sitting down, expository telling and summary, and that was definitely true here. And it felt like we could have lived in that a bit more, and that could have been fully dramatized instead of summarized. And that, to me, would have just increased everything. It was everything was great as is, and would have been even better if it had been more fully fleshed out in some spaces. And this is partially my own brain's fault. It's not like I fault Priest at all. But when for my brain, I'm very ADHD. I can't read, when you talk about just flat instructions on how to assemble your cabinet or anything like that, assembly instructions, period. My brain has a really hard time processing that. I will read instructions from top to bottom and have no idea what the hell they're trying to tell me. So when it gets into really lengthy bouts of exposition, especially when it comes to mythology and magic systems that I am largely unfamiliar with, it can all kind of start blurring, and I kind of start to lose a sense of what they're actually trying to tell me. And especially for volume 3, there was a lot of that. I think my favorite volume would probably be the first one. And so for me, in general, I prefer Priest as a whole, judging off of just Guardian, because that's all I've read of her. I prefer her when she's really living in a scene with the characters. She does scenes and the movement of a scene and the pacing of a scene and character interactions and character voice and character perspective. She does that so well. That's so good. It's so much fun to read. It is just so much fun. And I greatly preferred her scenes versus her mythological, diatribes of exposition, which still fascinating when my brain didn't want to just have it all bleed together. Still really fascinating, but in my opinion, her real strength comes in the full scenes and just character actions. And it felt like we could have gotten, I wanted more of that. So I wanted a longer series. Similarly, well, no, not similarly, but in terms of like structure, and I might get a little nerdy here. I'm sorry, I'm a writer. In terms of structure, I actually could have done with the Mountain Spirit bonus story, and this may have not have been possible, but I could have done with the Mountain Spirit bonus story being like right around in the middle of the overall story instead of a bonus thing at the end, because that would have given me so much to hang on to going into the second half of the story and having that kind of like context. I feel like it'd be really interesting to see a version of this where we find out all the meaning behind Shen Wei's name right around the middle off the top of my head. And then we have that going forward, because that as a whole endeared me to them even more, like so much, than some of the stuff that felt like, because it was so short, we were kind of skating over, and the pacing was very quick generally. And I think it would be really interesting to see a version where we find out the whole Mountain Spirit thing in the middle. I think that would have added even more emotional weight to everything we were seeing, and it would have given us a lot of important information. That would be an interesting, I guess, writing exercise to sit down and look at what it would take or what it could look like if you did something like that. And I might do that because I'm nerdy about writing. I really loved what they did with Go Cheng Chung and Chu Shijia. That remains classic, and they did total justice to it in the show. And I was really happy to see that was the case, because that meant that I got 3 volumes of Go Cheng Chung and Chu Shijia just being themselves. I wish they could have kind of gone fully romantic in the novel, but that's just because I wanted to see it so badly in the Chinese drama, and of course we weren't going to get that. But like, where's the fanfic for them? If someone could point that out to me, that would be great. I would appreciate some recommendations in that vein. And once again, I'm telling on myself. Zhuhong, I felt they were able to go into even more, and a whole lot more in some ways, in the show. But the show had a benefit of a lot of time. They had a lot of hours to fill. But I loved her in the volumes as much as I did in the show. Once again, the whole volumes could have been longer for me. I'm just selfish and greedy, and I just want more. I want everything fleshed out, because I love the world and the concepts going on with this world in terms of, like, you know, the mythos and the magic and everything. It's a really great, what the heck is the name of that subgenre? Paranormal fantasy, urban paranormal fantasy. Those 3 buzzwords in there somewhere. It's a really great setup for that. And so I just want all the things. I'm just greedy. That's just me. Yes, Epic. Epic said, I wonder what the book would have been like if she wasn't writing on the chapter a week schedule and she had time to edit and rearrange. I think about that with a lot of these novels, because a lot of them did start out as web novels that were publishing at a chapter a week. And I am assuming that they were all written at a chapter a week, like as it was happening, and it wasn't like they sat down, they finished it, and then they just released it piecemeal. Um, and I wonder that all the time, what it would look like if they had a chance to really go through and edit and revise, and what that would look like. Like, would they be able to, in any instance, not just with Guardian, would they be able to incorporate some of the bonus stories that maybe they didn't think of until they were getting towards the end of the story and they were like, oh shit, and then that's how bonus stories happen. But if they had an opportunity to go back and really revise, which is complicated though, because if you've been posting it the chapters every week and then you get to the end and you've already amassed this big following of the story, then they love that version of the story and they may not necessarily want to see it messed with. But from the danmei novels that I've read so far, on the whole, I personally would love to see a version of revision, a revised, like, edited version, where, when appropriate, they integrate a bonus or side story into it. And so now that actually makes a lot of sense that I think it was MXTX who did a huge edit for Heaven Official's Blessing, I think. Now that I connect those dots, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I'm really down for that. And of course, there's always two versions to have. You can have the edited version and you can have the original. But if people are only going to be mainly interested in the original, do you really want to go through all the effort to actually put out a fully edited version? Case by case basis. I'd kill to see a revisited version of Guardian, though. Oh yeah, no, see, Wolf, this makes me so excited for Silent Reading or Silent Reader. Is it Reader or Reading? I can never remember. The books that Justice in the Dark was based off of. This makes me so excited because she captures characters and voices and her scene work is so strong. I was excited before and I am like beside myself now. We will most likely get to more Priest before then because the first volume of Silent Reading, because the first volume of Silent Reading comes out around this time next year, the official English translation. And we will definitely get to Priest before then because, yeah, I have Chapeau Long is sitting there on my bookshelf. And that's Priest. Stars of Chaos, that's Priest. And that's another, I think, like 3-volume deal. So we will most likely get to that at the very least over the course of 2025, I'm sure. Like, I'd be shocked if we didn't. Yeah, and see, I keep hearing every time Silent Reading comes up, everyone's always like, it's her best. It's her best. It's the best one. It's my favorite Priest novel. It's the best. And having seen the first 8 episodes that exist of Justice in the Dark, I believe you. That show had me by the throat in big ways. And given the content of it, it leans into all of my favorite things about her that I've found so far. So I could not be more excited at all. Not possible. I'm so hyped. Oh my God. Also, just in some way, shape, or form, I get to see the rest of the story that Justice in the Dark started, but we're not going to talk about that. Chapeau Long is 5 volumes? Do I only have 3? Then maybe I only have 3 out of 5. Oops. I should probably add those to the wish list then. Whoops. I think it's now like 5:22. This is definitely, I think this is going to be the big spoiler warning for talking about the Guardian series, the C-drama, the live action show. I think we're now going to start making more specific comparisons between the book and the series. So this is your nice long-winded signal to go ahead and click away if you need to, if you don't want to be spoiled. This is a nice big long opportunity. You will not hurt my feelings. You know me. I'm very anti-spoiler. I won't hold it against you at all. If you've got to tune out and then come back to this when you finish the series, you go right ahead and do that. More love and empowerment to you. Okay, nice big long spoilers, specific and explicit spoilers for the live action series from here on out. Yeah? If you're still here, you're cool with that. Okay? Okay, so that ending, the ending of the fucking series. Now, the ending of the series, the only way that I can look at it and not feel like I want to fling myself into the sun is the whole reincarnation thing in the context of the end of the series. I'm like, okay, so their souls can't be together right now, but with the way that these things go, at some point down the line, they will meet again and they will get another chance again. So it's like it's not happily ever after now, but it can be happily ever after later. And that's how I have to look at it, because I tell you, I was not expecting, and I don't think anyone was, I was not expecting that. I guess the emphasis was on bitter and the bittersweet of the ending to that series. It didn't fit the vibe that they had really set up. I really loved the way that they got very big and emotional about it at the end. That was great. And there are so many things I love about the series. And I think actually my favorite version of the Guardian story is somewhere between the series and the original novel. It exists somewhere in there. But the ultimate ending, I was so thrown by it. And when I was first watching it in the reaction, I thought that it was they'll never see each other again. They'll never exist with each other again. I thought it was a real tragedy ending. But then when it was brought up to me later that kind of the whole point was a reincarnation thing, that's when I realized that it was a little bit more open-ended than I thought. But I was really fucking thrown by that ending. That kind of fucked me up. And so obviously the ending in the novel, much better. Canon ending. Thank you so much. That is how my brain is treating that. 1000%. She got me right down to the last page, practically, of the main story, which was mean of her, but she gave it to me. So really, I can't be angry about it. Not really. I already mentioned that. And that. Hang on. And that. Oh, I must say, I kind of missed, because the series does that whole thing with Go Chang Chung being dead for a while and Chu Shu Jia just going to pieces. That was amazing in the series. And I must say, I wish that had been in this somehow. Because that was a uniquely beautiful kind of queer angsty pain that apparently they put in that wasn't in the original story. And I'm like, good on them. I mean, it hurt, and I'm not going to forgive them for it, but I would have loved to see her render that in the book itself. I already said that. Oh, that might be everything I have. Oh, thank you so much for that super chat. Thank you so much. That's so nice of you. Oh my god, yeah, that is. That's the first super chat I've ever had on a live stream. Well, I'll be damned. Thank you, Oh, yes. Priest is mean, but in a good way. Thank you! I had almost forgotten about that. Thank you. Len Jade, thank you. Ghostface is more fleshed out in the show than in the book. That was another thing that they got to flesh out that I really appreciate about the show. They did a whole thing with Ghostface. They really went, because they were like, we need a proper villain. They were like, we really need to anchor this story with a proper villain for a live action show. And they really fucking did, to fantastic, phenomenal effect. And even though what we got of No Face, what we got of Ghostface in the book was still great and still had that tone and still had that characterization about him that is delightful. What they were able to do with it, the show, I vastly prefer. They really took that and ran with it in ways that I just loved. That was so much fun. It was so good. I lost my shit about Ghostface. That was fantastic. They were really, in more than one way, they were really able to really do something, take something about Guardian and really run with it in a way that was really great. Ending notwithstanding, they really did a lot of great with it. I'm just checking out the chat real quick, since we're coming up on 5:30. Oh yeah, that Yizun, he is eternal. He is just fantastic, and it really gave, I'm blanking, Zhu Yulong, and it really gave Zhu Yulong a chance to really showcase his two different vibes. He really leaned into it. He was great. Fantastic. They also expanded on Zhao's dad a lot more in a way that I really appreciated and I remembered being really interesting. They did some different things there too that was really great. On a whole, I'm very happy now with the hindsight of the novel. I'm pretty happy with a lot of things that they did in the show. And I think I would, on the whole, I can understand why Priest did what she did with the bonus story after finding out the ending that they did in the show. I totally get that. But outside of that, if I were Priest, I would be really overall happy with an adaptation. Adaptations have gone a lot worse for a lot of different authors. I would count myself generally lucky. I mean, you've already won the lottery when you get an adaptation to begin with, but then from there, whether the adaptation's good or not, I'd be generally happy. I'm sorry, what? Wolf. You gotta elaborate. What? They both read the novels. I think I knew that. That Baiyu and Zhu Yulong both read the actual book, which makes me happy. I knew that. But what's that last bit? Like, Baiyu voice acting his fave bits? You're gonna have to elaborate on that a little bit more. Oh, and another thing that didn't happen in the book that happened in the show was that, unless I'm really forgetting something in the book, was that whole that scene in the apartment when Shen Wei immediately comes back with that whispered, like, yeah, you're worth it, or something to that effect in the apartment. That took me out. That threw me off a cliff. What do you mean? That moment, ridiculous. That goes under things that I greatly appreciate from the show. It is in the book, but a bit differently. Okay. I was really looking out for specifically like you're worth it. So if that's not exactly what he says, I wouldn't be surprised if that just went right over my head, to be honest, because I can do that to myself very much. Um. Hmm. Mickey was like, yeah, because it could have been canceled after episode 8. Ow, Mickey. That hurts. That's ow. You're not wrong. But ow. Excuse me. By you read out the confession scenes and the Shadow Army summons on a radio show and on a live? I don't suppose there's a link to that anywhere, or that exists somewhere out online that I could either hear or see. I would listen to it even without subtitles. I wouldn't even care. I would just I would listen to that audio. I don't need it translated. It's secondary. I just need to hear it or see it. If I could see it, I would die. Oh, there's a link for it. Okay. Yeah, please head on over to the Gaywatch Tumblr and link that for me. Holy shit. I will publish that for all to see. Most definitely. Okay. It's a little past 5:30 and now I must go. Oh, and the Discord, if you could send it on the Discord as well. I have to go. This is sort of the unofficial beginning to my mandatory holiday vacation. I still have some uploading to do to get the Patreon all set and squared away so that they keep getting stuff while I'm gone. But in terms of making things, this is it for me for like 3 weeks. And then for a week after that, I get to sit in this room and plot and organize and prepare for what I want to happen with Gaywatch in 2025. And it's pretty exciting. And it's pretty ambitious. But I'm jazzed. And I'm greatly excited to be able to come back in the new year and pick up Urha again and keep reading Urha and get going on a lot of deeply exciting things that I want to start doing in 2025. So we'll talk about that when I get back. Thank you so much for sticking around for Guardian. I hope you had a great time. I had a blast. You know me. I love these things to pieces, and I will keep telling you that because it's true. I love doing these. They're so much freaking fun. And I have no idea what we're going to read next between volumes of Urha, but you guys will get to vote on it. So, I love you very, very much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend. It's Friday. It's not Thursday. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. You will definitely hear about when we are coming back for Urha streams in January. You will see a post ahead of time, so it won't drop on your head out of nowhere. Please take care of yourselves for this holiday season. Very, very happy New Year, as it is my favorite holiday. And I will see you guys in 2025. That sounds fake. But I'll see you then, okay? I love you very, very much. Really.